It was a typical Friday afternoon in Mr. Peterson's calculus class, and everyone was counting down the minutes until spring break. The seventh period was dragging on, and you could feel the restless energy in the room as students shifted in their seats, already mentally checked out for the week. Mr. Peterson was one of those laid-back teachers who understood that keeping our attention on a Friday afternoon was nearly impossible. Instead of forcing us through another lesson, he had pulled up Sporkle on the smartboard and was having us compete in random trivia games. We were in the middle of a brand logo quiz when everything changed. I remember the exact moment it happened. My friend Jake had just correctly identified the Adidas logo, and we were all laughing because he'd gotten it wrong twice before. That's when the dean's voice crackled through the intercom system, cutting through our laughter like a knife. His voice was different from the usual morning announcements. There was an edge to it, a panic that immediately made everyone in the room go silent. All teachers, this is not a drill. Initiate lockdown procedures immediately. The change in Mr. Peterson was instant and terrifying. This man who had been joking with us just seconds before suddenly became someone I didn't recognize. He sprinted to the light switches, plunging the room into darkness, and then rushed to usher all 23 of us to the far corner of the classroom. "Everyone sit down and be quiet," he whispered urgently. No talking, no phones, nothing. We huddled together in the corner, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The usual hum of the electrical system suddenly stopped, indicating that someone had cut the main power to the school. That's when it really hit me that this wasn't some routine drill or false alarm. For the first few minutes, we sat in complete silence. You could hear people breathing, the occasional shuffle of clothing, but nobody dared to speak. The darkness made everything feel more intense, more real. Then we heard it, a man's voice screaming at the top of his lungs somewhere down the hallway. The sound was getting closer, and as it did, we could make out what he was saying. "I'll kill all of you, every single one of you." Two girls in our class, Sarah and Emma, started crying quietly. Their fear was contagious, and I could feel my own panic rising as the screaming grew louder and more distinct. The sound of metal banging echoed through the hallway as the man started slamming something against the lockers. Each crash made us jump, and Mr. Peterson kept motioning for us to stay down and stay quiet. Then the banging moved to our door. The sound of fists pounding against the wooden door was deafening in the small space. The man was right outside, separated from us by only a few inches of wood and a standard classroom lock. "Open up! I know you're in there!" he screamed, his voice hoarse and desperate. Emma couldn't contain herself anymore and let out a terrified scream. "No!" The banging intensified. The door was shaking in its frame, and I genuinely thought he might break through. Sarah was sobbing now, and several other students were crying too. The sound of pure terror from my classmates was almost worse than the man outside. Mr. Peterson moved closer to the door, and for a moment I thought he was going to try to hold it shut, but he just stood there listening. His face was pale in the dim light filtering through the covered windows. The pounding continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Then suddenly, it stopped. We could hear the man's voice moving away from our door, continuing down the hallway, still screaming threats and obscenities. We waited in that corner for another 10 minutes, nobody daring to move or speak, until the dean's voice came back over the intercom. "Teachers, please maintain lockdown positions while we provide an update." His voice was calmer now, more controlled, but you could still hear the strain. He explained that an apparently mentally unstable individual had entered the building through the main entrance and had assaulted Mrs. Rodriguez, the woman who worked at the front desk. She had managed to escape and call for help, but staff weren't sure if the intruder was armed. This was 2018, before our school had updated security systems or cameras. The building was essentially wide open, with no metal detectors or security guards. Anyone could walk in during school hours. The dean continued, explaining that staff had conducted a sweep of the hallways and classrooms but hadn't located the intruder. Classes would resume, but all doors were to remain locked, and no students were to leave their classrooms for any reason. The rest of the afternoon was tense and surreal. Mr. Peterson tried to return to normal activities, but nobody could concentrate. We kept glancing at the door, jumping at every small sound in the hallway. It wasn't until the next Monday that we learned the most disturbing part of the story. Over the weekend, Randy, one of the night janitors, had been doing his usual rounds when he discovered someone sleeping in a storage closet near the back of the school. The man had apparently been hiding there since the lockdown, probably waiting for the building to empty so he could leave undetected. According to the rumors that spread through school, when Randy found him, there was a .44 Magnum pistol sticking out of his jacket pocket. Randy made the mistake of leaving the closet door open while he went to call security. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. He had vanished into the night, and as far as I know, he was never caught. For weeks afterward, every unexpected sound in the hallways made students nervous. The administration increased security measures, installed new locks, and started talking about hiring actual security guards. But the psychological impact lingered much longer than the physical changes to the building. Knowing that someone with a loaded gun had been roaming our school, banging on classroom doors and threatening to kill people, changed how we all felt about what should have been a safe space. I still think about that Friday afternoon sometimes, especially when I hear about school lockdowns on the news. I wonder what would have happened if that man had found a way into our classroom, or if Randy hadn't discovered him in that storage closet. The most disturbing part wasn't just that a dangerous person had entered our school, but how vulnerable we all realized we were. 23 teenagers and one teacher, huddled in a dark corner, protected by nothing more than a standard door lock and the hope that we could stay quiet enough to avoid being noticed. I graduated the following year, but I heard that the school eventually installed security cameras, hired guards, and implemented new protocols for visitors. Changes that probably should have been made years earlier, but it took a terrifying incident like ours to make them a priority. Sometimes I wonder about that man, whether he got the mental health treatment he clearly needed, or whether he's still out there somewhere. The dean was right when he announced the lockdown. This definitely wasn't a drill. It was a brutal reminder that schools aren't immune to the violence and instability that exists in the world outside their walls. The experience taught me that safety is never guaranteed, even in places where you should feel protected. And sometimes the only thing standing between you and danger is luck, timing, and a locked door that hopefully holds long enough for help to arrive. My middle school has 2 lunch periods. First lunch is for all 6th graders and some 7th graders, while second lunch is for the remaining 7th graders and all 8th graders. The incident I'm about to tell you happened during first lunch in early October, on one of those gray, overcast days when you can feel rain in the air. I was sitting with my usual group of friends in the cafeteria when we heard 4 loud booms coming from outside. At first, I thought it was thunder. The weather had been threatening all morning, and those deep rumbling sounds seemed to fit with the dark clouds we'd seen gathering over the school. But then the entire lunch crowd started screaming. I remember thinking that my classmates were being dramatic. Middle schoolers can be pretty excitable, and I figured they were just overreacting to some thunder. But then the campus security guards came running into the cafeteria, their faces grim and urgent. "Everyone needs to move to the multi-purpose room immediately," they shouted over the noise. "Drop whatever you're doing and come with us now." Students who were in line buying lunch had to abandon their trays and follow the crowd. The security guards weren't taking questions or explaining what was happening. They just kept herding us toward the multi-purpose room with a sense of urgency that made my stomach drop. My friends and I joined the stream of confused and frightened students being rushed into the large room. The multi-purpose room was huge, big enough to hold assemblies for the entire school, and it had a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows along the back that normally provided a nice view of the neighborhood behind the school. As soon as we were all inside, the security guards and teachers began pulling heavy curtains across those windows, blocking our view of whatever was happening outside. There were adults stationed at every exit, and nobody was allowed to leave for any reason. My friend Eric was as curious as the rest of us about what was going on. While we huddled with the other students, he managed to catch one of the teachers and ask what was happening. When he came back to our group, his face was pale. "You know those houses right across from the school?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied. There was a residential street that ran parallel to our campus with several older houses that had seen better days. "There's this guy who lives in one of them," Eric continued, lowering his voice so the younger kids around us wouldn't hear. "Apparently he's mentally disabled or something, and he's having some kind of breakdown. He barricaded himself in his front yard, and he's threatening to kill himself and any cops who try to evict him." The words sent a chill through our group. We were close enough to those houses that we could normally see them clearly from the multi-purpose room windows. "But that's not the worst part," Eric added, glancing around to make sure no teachers were listening. "The teacher said he was walking around outside the school earlier, watching kids in a really weird way, and it turns out he's a registered sex offender." Now I understood why they had rushed us inside so quickly and blocked the windows. This wasn't just about someone having a mental health crisis. This was about a dangerous person who had been specifically watching our school and our students. We were stuck in that multi-purpose room for over an hour, missing 2 entire class periods. The teachers tried to keep us calm by having us sit in groups and talk quietly, but everyone was on edge. The younger students were especially scared because they didn't fully understand what was happening, just that something was seriously wrong. Every few minutes, we could hear adults talking in hushed tones near the exits, occasionally receiving updates on their radios. The security guards kept checking the windows to make sure the curtains were completely closed. Finally, after what felt like forever, the teachers announced that the situation had been resolved and we would be escorted back to our classrooms one by one. They made sure we moved in small groups with adult supervision, and nobody was allowed to look toward the houses across the street as we walked. Later that day, I learned more details from my friend Brandy, who lived on the same street as the man who had caused the lockdown. She told me something that made the whole situation even more disturbing. "I've been afraid of that guy for months," she said, during our last period class. "Do you remember last Halloween?" I nodded, wondering where this was going. "I was trick-or-treating with my little brother and we walked past his house," Brandy continued. "I looked up at his front window and there he was, standing there cutting his arm with something sharp. And he had written something on the window in what looked like blood." My stomach turned. "What did it say?" "Don't come here or I'll kill you," she whispered. At the time, I thought it was just some really intense Halloween decoration. You know how some people go overboard with the scary stuff, but after today, I realized he was completely serious. The idea that this man had been displaying violent threats for months and that people in the neighborhood had just assumed it was holiday decoration was terrifying. How many other warning signs had been ignored or misinterpreted? Over the following days, we learned more about what had actually happened during the lockdown. The man had apparently been evicted from his house and had responded by creating a barricade in his front yard using furniture and debris. He had been armed with multiple weapons and had made specific threats against law enforcement and anyone who tried to approach his property. What made it relevant to our school was that witnesses had seen him walking along the fence line of our campus earlier that morning, staring at students during outdoor activities and recess. His behavior had been reported to the office, but before security could investigate, he had returned to his house and the standoff had begun. The 4 loud booms we had heard weren't thunder at all. They were either gunshots or some kind of explosive devices the man had set off in his yard as a warning to police. The sound had carried clearly across the short distance to our school, which was why the entire cafeteria had erupted in screams. The situation had been resolved when a negotiator finally convinced the man to surrender peacefully. He was taken into custody and transferred to a mental health facility for evaluation. His house was searched and police found additional weapons and evidence of the disturbing fixation he had developed on our school. The administration sent a letter home to parents explaining what had happened and assuring them that additional security measures were being implemented. They also arranged for counselors to be available for any students who were struggling with anxiety about the incident. But for those of us who lived in the neighborhood, the fear lingered. Brandy's family ended up moving to a different part of town within a few months. She said her parents couldn't stand the idea of living so close to where someone had been planning potential violence against children. I think about that day whenever I hear about school security threats on the news. It made me realize how many potential dangers exist in the communities around schools, and how quickly a situation can escalate from concerning to life-threatening. The most disturbing part wasn't just that a dangerous person had been watching our school, but that he had been displaying clear warning signs for months without anyone taking them seriously. If people had reported his Halloween window display or his previous concerning behavior, maybe the situation could have been prevented entirely. It also made me think about how many other people in our community might be struggling with untreated mental illness or developing unhealthy obsessions with schools and children. The incident was a wake-up call that safety isn't just about what happens inside school buildings, but about recognizing and addressing threats that develop in the broader community. Looking back, I'm grateful that the school administration took the threat seriously and acted quickly to protect us. Being stuck in that multi-purpose room for an hour was inconvenient and scary, but it was nothing compared to what could have happened if they had ignored the warning signs or assumed the man was harmless. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the lockdown hadn't been called, if students had been outside during recess or walking to lunch when the man's mental state deteriorated further. The thought of what could have been keeps me aware that school safety is an ongoing challenge that requires vigilance from everyone in the community. I'm 22 years old, fresh out of college with a computer science degree, and I recently landed what seemed like the perfect job at my old high school. They hired me as a computer technician intern, working in the basement where all the school's servers and IT equipment are housed. The basement office was actually pretty nice considering it was underground. It had 3 large desks, 2 mini fridges, a flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, and most importantly, powerful air conditioning that the rest of the school couldn't afford. It was like a little tech cave, separate from the chaos of teenage life happening above us. I got the job because 3 of my former computer teachers had recommended me. Mr. Chen, Mrs. Rodriguez, and Mr. Williams had all been mentors during my high school years, and they'd helped me get this position working alongside 2 full-time technicians, Dave and Gary. The setup was perfect for someone like me. I could work on server maintenance, troubleshoot network issues, and help with the school's technology upgrades without having to deal with classroom management or teenage drama. It had been going great for several months until something happened a few weeks ago that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was eating my lunch at my desk while working on updating some software. Dave and Gary were both upstairs, probably dealing with printer issues or helping teachers with their computers. The basement was quiet except for the hum of the servers and the air conditioning. I was halfway through my sandwich when my phone rang. It was Linda from the front office, and her voice was tense and urgent. "Listen carefully," she said. "The school is going into lockdown immediately. Someone possibly armed has entered the building. You need to secure yourself down there and wait for further instructions." My blood ran cold. The basement office was secure in some ways, but also vulnerable in others. The good news was that most people didn't even know it existed. The bad news was that it didn't have an actual door, just a wide opening, and the main basement entrance didn't have a working lock. I quickly turned off all the lights in the office and shut down my computer monitor, plunging the space into near total darkness. I sent urgent text messages to both Dave and Gary, but neither of them responded. They were probably locked down in whatever classroom they'd been working in when the alert went out. For the first 20 minutes, I sat in the dark, playing games on my phone with the brightness turned all the way down. I had no idea what was happening upstairs. The basement was so well insulated that I couldn't hear anything from the floors above. I kept checking my phone for updates from Linda or the administration, but there was nothing. The silence was almost worse than if I could hear what was going on. My imagination was running wild with possibilities. Then I heard the basement door creak open. The sound echoed through the concrete hallway and into my office. I sat up straight, wondering if I should call out to see if it was Dave or Gary returning. I was desperate for information about what was happening upstairs. Heavy footsteps started coming down the stairs, moving quickly but deliberately. I pushed my chair away from my desk and crawled underneath it, my heart pounding. Something about those footsteps didn't sound right. They were too urgent, too purposeful. Someone entered the office area but didn't turn on any lights. I could hear them breathing heavily like they'd been running. The darkness that had felt protective before now felt terrifying because I couldn't see who was in the room with me. For several minutes, there was just silence. I was curled up under my desk, trying not to breathe too loudly, when my phone suddenly dinged with a text message notification. The sound seemed deafeningly loud in the quiet space. I felt my entire world collapse in that moment as I realized I'd just given away my position. I clenched my teeth and waited for whatever was going to happen next. Footsteps moved closer to my hiding spot, slow, deliberate steps that seemed to be searching for the source of the sound. I knew I was caught. Finally, I couldn't take the tension anymore. I dove out from under the desk, throwing my hands up and begging, "Please don't kill me, I don't want any trouble." A hand grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet. In the dim light, I could make out a man wearing a red plaid button-up shirt, jeans, and a reddish-black baseball cap. He looked ordinary, like someone's dad or uncle. "It's okay," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I'm just down here hiding with you. What's going on up there?" I was so relieved that he didn't seem immediately threatening that I almost forgot to be suspicious. "I don't know," I whispered. "They just told me there was a lockdown and to stay down here." He nodded and looked around the office space. "Is there another exit down here?" he asked. "Yeah, around that way." I pointed toward the back of the basement. "There's a door that leads to the outside." Before he could respond, I realized I should probably find out who this person was. "Who are you?" I asked. There was a brief pause before he started explaining. "I was coming in to pick up my son when a teacher told me to hide. They said there was some kind of emergency." His explanation seemed reasonable enough. Parents came to the school all the time for various reasons. but something about his demeanor was making me uneasy. I checked my phone to see what the text message had been, and what I read made my blood freeze. It was from Dave. "Dude, this is crazy. Some guy with a gun shot Mr. Buckley. He's wearing a red shirt and hat. Whatever you do, don't come upstairs." I looked up from my phone and felt my stomach drop. The man standing in front of me was wearing exactly what Dave had described, a red plaid shirt and a reddish-black hat. The man seemed to catch onto my suspicious stare. The friendly demeanor dropped from his face, and I could see something dangerous in his eyes. Panicking, the only thing I could think to do was run. I bolted toward the basement stairs, hoping to reach the main floor where there would be police or security guards. Behind me, I heard a deafening gunshot echo through the basement. The sound reverberated off the concrete walls, and I could hear the bullet ricochet off something metal in the darkness. Somehow, miraculously, the shot missed me. I reached the basement door and burst through it, expecting to run right into the chaos of an active shooter situation. Instead, I found police officers waiting at all the exits, including the basement entrance. They immediately tackled me to the ground, not knowing if I was a threat or a victim. Within seconds, they realized I was running from the shooter, not toward victims. "He's down there," I screamed, pointing back toward the basement. "The guy who shot Mr. Buckley, he's wearing a red shirt." The officers moved quickly, securing the basement entrance. When the shooter tried to escape through the same door I'd used, they were ready for him. He was arrested without further incident. The good news was that Mr. Buckley survived the shooting. He'd been hit in the shoulder and had lost some blood, but he was going to be okay. The bullet had missed all major arteries and organs. Later, we learned that the shooter had some kind of personal grudge against Mr. Buckley, though the details were never made public. All we knew was that whatever their conflict was, it definitely didn't justify an armed attack at a school. The investigation revealed that the man had planned the shooting in advance. He'd waited for a time when he knew Mr. Buckley would be alone in his classroom, and he'd brought the gun specifically to hurt him. When the lockdown was announced, he'd panicked and fled to the basement, not knowing that someone else was down there. For weeks afterward, I couldn't get the sound of that gunshot out of my head. The metallic echo, the way it reverberated through the concrete space. The realization of how close I'd come to being killed by someone I'd been having a normal conversation with just moments before. The school administration was incredibly supportive. They arranged for counseling and offered to relocate my office to a different part of the building. But honestly, the basement never felt safe again. I ended up leaving the job a few months later. Every time I went down those stairs, I remembered the feeling of hiding under that desk, not knowing if the person in the room with me was there to help or to hurt me. The experience taught me that danger can come from the most unexpected places and people. This wasn't some obviously unstable stranger. It was someone who could carry on a normal conversation while planning violence. Someone who could seem helpful and concerned while being the actual threat. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten that text from Dave, if I'd continued to trust the man in the red shirt. Would he have killed me to eliminate a witness? Would he have taken me hostage? The possibilities still keep me awake some nights. I'm grateful that Mr. Buckley recovered and that the situation didn't escalate into something even worse. But the incident was a brutal reminder that schools, despite all their security measures and protocols, can't protect against every threat, especially when that threat comes from someone who appears to belong there.